So talk about UI. That's a nice touch that you know sound is recording because of the. Okay, so we're screen capturing now. What? Like I've increasingly become of the opinion that like almost anything could start by looking at processing first. We were saying before that we did an experiment in Toronto where we had some classes learn web design, HTML before processing, and vice versa. And people who learned processing first seemed to catch on faster. That it was a good introduction. So the stuff that came in at the end of this, like working with classes and working with, especially the way to build particle systems, that might have been a good place to start, possibly. So comp. Here's a comp. Here's some stuff in the comp. And I'm going to put this comp inside a new comp. And of course, because it's hierarchical, if I change anything in comp 1 here, then it updates in all of them. And I can further change or apply effects to any of these effects. And so on. But I can always go down to the earliest level. So let's go one level more. And what I'm doing here by dragging this into the new comp button, once again, like this wouldn't be Adobe if they weren't tiny, inexplicable buttons everywhere, part of the interface. I could do the same by selecting these and saying layer pre-composed. We may have looked at that before. But I just find this simpler.
So if you double click on, pre-comp is not materially different than a comp.
Right.
But so I have the experience of making a pre-comp and then double clicking it and trying to get into it and nothing would happen. Like none of its pieces were available.
Okay. What may have happened there? And just like before, any change we make, so now we're 2 levels deep, and any change we make to the original propagates through the whole mass. So, yeah?
How do you turn off the frames around the layers?
Though that's a UI thing, that's not going to be part of your...
I understand.
Oh yeah? Maybe it's in the preferences somewhere. That came in with CS6, I believe. Maybe CS5.5. There will probably be a here, show internal wireframes. Is that the no? There will probably be a setting somewhere in here to disable that highlighting.
The
But-
bracket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I haven't been able to turn
Oh yeah. Okay. Maybe not. Sorry.
So there's
Yeah.
the mask highlighting in the corner by the frame count. I'm pointing on the screen.
Here, here.
Is that it?
This is the button.
No, it doesn't seem to.
Oh no.
So like you were about to tell me what could have gone wrong with pre-comp.
So if you start over here, it's not going to be very useful. So if you have a layer and then you apply some effects to it, Incidentally, fast blur is often just as, for many purposes, as good as Gaussian blur, and it's faster. Just apply effects to it, and then just to be clear of what's going on here, let's apply a few more. Remember how order of operations work, right? So noise followed by fast blur is different from vice versa. Okay, so we have some effects, and then if I say layer pre-compose, as opposed to just dropping, that's another reason I like dropping on the icon method, because it avoids this potential pitfall. If I say pre-compose, you have this choice of leave all attributes in comp 1 or move all attributes into the new composition. Well, this is a shape layer, so this will be grayed out. But this is what behaves as we expect. We double click on the comp, and everything inside it is just like what we put in there. With certain things, let's try this with a piece of footage. Maybe this will be more amenable. So here's a comp, here's this, we applied an effect to it. Now I'm going to say layer pre-compose. And here is the setting that can sometimes mess you up, which is leave all attributes in Moon in the original movie clip. Because what that does is inside this, it doesn't actually encapsulate everything inside a comp. It puts the footage inside a comp and then leaves all the effects outside it. So you would then go into that comp and see Moon unchanged, and that often isn't what you want. Like usually when you want to bundle a bunch of stuff up in a comp, you want to put them all in there. And it's just a case of confusing wording. They should. If I were doing this, I would describe it as well. I guess basically what it is: leave all attributes at this level, move all attributes. But it's just confusingly worded. So basically, if you use the drag to a new icon method, then you're always doing the sort of move everything into another comp method, and that's usually how I prefer to think about it. It is kind of handy to have that pre-comp option when, say, if you had a big project with 3 dozen layers and maybe you wanted to get only a certain number of them into the... Yeah, there are times when you'd like to do that, but in general, just when you're ready to go up a layer, drag your comp into a new one. And also numbering helps. The convention, this pre-comp and comp, there's no difference. It's the same as when you import a PSD, right? That comes in as a composition as well. Like everything with this icon is a comp, like a symbol in Flash, another nested timeline in an editor. So like, I'll call my main project comp 1, and then if I go up levels from that, I'll usually call them, comp 2 or whatever. And if I have components in there that are subdivisions, I might call those a pre-comp or just a character name. I might call it like something like Moon or pre-comp 1. Some kind of organizational scheme is pretty important. You may end up going by shot or shot or scene. Here's a pretty large and complex project that I think I've shown before. Where every scene was a separate After Effects project. Oh, and incidentally, if you're working with collaborators on a small project, one really easy, quick, and dirty way of realizing who has touched each project last is use your initials when you save over it. And you always know who's worked on it last. And of course that can go wrong as well, and there are versioning systems for complex projects. But yeah, so here we have each shot is its own file, and each pre-comp is a character name. You may also have multiple views of different characters. This is kind of not very clear because all the assets are missing.
That's actually another question. Is
Yeah.
how to read stuff.
Yep. Basically, the easiest way I find is double click and then navigate to where it is. And also, if you have stuff in the same or lower directories, After Effects is usually very good about finding it for you.
One of the best features that they have.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what exactly they're doing right? But say like Final Cut was often famously stupid about finding other things in the same directory, like relinking. Like you often really just had to relink everything manually. Whereas if you have a bunch of files and you point it to the right one, the others are like sitting in the same or lower directory level, then usually After Effects will just link them up at the same time. Yeah, and then these all got assembled in an editor. So, other questions? Like this is a good. Yeah.
Any chance we could go over the best settings for optimal fastest workflow so that After Effects doesn't go crazy?
Well, it should rarely be crashing.
So it just becomes
yeah.
very sluggish.
Yeah.
Rarely crash on a laptop.
Yeah.
No. I crash all the time.
Oh yeah. What are you using? Like what plugins? Anything in particular?
Plugins.
Yeah.
Any plugins that use GPU on
Mhm.
these guys, I get crashes. You add motion blur, the
certain plugins, especially anything that deals with the OpenGL stuff. Like you were playing around with Element last time. Yeah, Element, Plexus, anything to do with the new ray traced renderer mode. These are all brand new features. Which is
shadow fall off.
yeah, but in the classic render still.
Classic render, yeah.
Okay, all right, I take it back. But still, like their sluggishness, there are a few basic tips to keep in mind when you're setting up projects. The biggest one for working in this is that this slider here is not the resolution of your project. This is a common misunderstanding. When I switch this from full to half, this is just the display. You're not permanently having the resolution of your project. Let's start from scratch. That's done when you set your comp here. So you have an HD comp, and dropping the comp Windows resolution is a great way to speed things up. And in fact, usually while you're working, you want to keep it. I would keep it at a third. I don't know what folks think. And that right away you'll notice will be a tremendous speed up because you're only rendering every third pixel. Another thing to do here in your preview is you can skip every other frame, every fourth frame, every fifth frame. Take a look here. I mean, here's a stupid simple thing. Position here to here. If I say skip every fifth frame, we get this. You may want to do that on a really complex project, right? So those are two things that can really speed up your rendering time. Another thing is you might not want to work at 24 frames per second. You might want to work at 12. I mean, you'll still want to finish, turn your finished master to 24 frames per second. That can cause you problems down the road if you don't. For instance, YouTube may not recognize it as HD when you upload it if it's not 24 frames per second or higher. But to work, I mean, this has been an animation trick since really the dawn of cinema. That 24 frames per second is a lot of frames to animate. It's a lot of frames for a person to animate by hand. It's a lot of frames for a computer to render. So if you drop the frame rate to 12, you're rendering everything twice as fast, and everything takes half as much disk space. I mean, things will look a little choppier, but animation, unlike live action, I think holds up rather well at 12 frames per second. Certain things, camera moves, you can see the difference here. But depending on your style, that can also introduce a nice handmade look into things. So the combination of those three, the dropping the view resolution, playing around with the skip frames in preview, and then considering just dropping the frame rate of your comp altogether if you're depending on what kind of material you're working with. Maybe if you're compositing live action, that's not going to be an option, right? Because the frame rate of live action usually 24 frames per second these days. That's not negotiable. But if you're doing animation, again, that's an option
So
as
you
well.
render at 12 and then at what point do you go back to
That would be in the editor.
and from there you export and import.
Yeah, most editors are good about if you drop in a comp at a different frame rate, they will play it back. They will basically conform it to the existing frame rate. So it'll just play every frame twice.
So say if you do want to do the lower FPS workflow, but you set keyframes at a higher FPS, how would you convert that? Because now the keyframe, like say if you did 2997.
Okay, in After Effects, so here you have, let's have a 2997 comp. And this, by the way, is not something you would commonly work with. There are cameras that will shoot in this, but increasingly, it's it's always 24p. But for sake of argument, say you had 2997. You could just drag it into another comp and give the new comp a new frame rate, and it will work it out. It can be choppy depending on how the numbers divide.
Yeah,
Right. Well, there are effects like Twixtor is a great plugin that can morph. It automatically morphs every frame. I'm pretty sure it came out of technology that got used in the Matrix, the original one, to do the morph between the photographs for bullet time. So that can read time some things, although it can leave artifacts. If it's just keyframes, I'm pretty sure After Effects will work out the differences for you. If it's
Sometimes they put it in between
right.
the frame, and I don't know if that means that it's going to skip over and jump, or it's just that it will figure out.
It's interpolating.
Yeah, in general, mixing frame rates sucks. I mean, and especially going between. Does everyone understand why we were suddenly talking about 30? That this is a fun thing to do. Got a second. I'm not doing the viewing examples because we're so pressed for time in these relatively short classes. But it's always fun to see, there's GoldenEye title from 1995, the first to use After Effects. Okay, I'll just show a small snippet of each. These are the James Bond titles using really early 2D computer graphics. Oh, they took it down. I was going to say they had the studio. It looked like a legit release from the studio of the current James Bond title. So it gives you a nice perspective on how much CG has changed.
So this last one, Skyfall,
Yeah.
They look aesthetically, it's very beautiful,
Mhm.
but I think in terms of telling a story, it fails completely because it starts so beautifully with the hand and then it goes all over the place and you're like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah. Well.
I think the one with the cards, do you remember the one with the cards? That one was the best one. Yeah, that one was with the cards.
Oh, I haven't seen that one. The new one, the Dan Craig one.
No, this is
haven't seen
the
it.
old one with the cards. I think it was the first thing I heard.
Yeah.
Was it?
Casino
The
Royale?
James Bond opening titles.
Casino Royale? Casino Royale?
Yes, Casino Royale. Yeah. One of the best.
Yeah, I'll check that one out. There's this whole thing too, right? Where opening titles came and went and came back, right? Because we shifted from titles of all the credits at the beginning of the movie, in which case the title sequence, an elaborate title sequence made sense. Then they shifted to the end, and we had decades of movies without opening titles. Then they came back in the 90s. Like Seven was one of the first big features, right, in several decades to have a big opening title sequence, and now they're a staple again. But just frame rates. That's why we're talking about 30. So these are the frame rates presumably you'll be looking at for some time to come. I mean, depending on whether Peter Jackson's 48 frames per second gambit succeeds. I don't know if you've been following this. The Hobbit, I don't know if this is just this whole thing is going to be insane hubris, or if people said that about the first Lord of the Rings trilogy, or if it'll somehow be awesome. Also, turning one book into 3 movies seems greedy. But the thing is being shot at 48 frames per second. So presumably in 4K and in stereo 3D. So already you're doubling, right, and doubling again the width and height of the frame for 4K. Then you're doubling again for for 3D. Then you're doubling it again for 48 frames per second instead of 24. So
This is America.
well, it's New Zealand, but same basic attitude, maybe. Yeah.
So when we should do the 5D, we should choose the 24 option, right?
I would say yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, shoot the 5D. Yeah, I would say just also there's a really important practical reason I would say to stick with 24 frames per second with the 5Ds, because the reason that everyone got so excited over the DSLRs, remember, it wasn't just that they shot in HD, because tons of things shoot in HD. The thing is, it doesn't usually look very good. What makes the DSLRs special, Canon DSLRs, is that they shoot at 48 megabits per second. Which I don't know why they keep measuring things in bits anymore. I guess because it sounds bigger and that helps with advertising. Remember that a byte is 8 bits, so divide it. 48 divided by 8, so that's 6 megabytes.
I think it was they wanted to separate storage versus data rate.
Oh yeah, was that it?
I
Yeah.
think that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Transmission
they
rate,
separated
yeah.
it more.
So that's almost double the rate of DV. DV is 3.5 megabytes per second, DV tape. Nobody wanted to make a consumer camera that had a higher bandwidth than DV tape. Basically, because my understanding, because they didn't want to hurt their professional camera lines. Right? I mean, Sony, Panasonic, somebody sell cameras that cost tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the key difference is that they shoot at much higher bit rates. Canon didn't have a professional video camera line to hurt, so they did this. But that's a fixed limit, right? So each frame, if you shoot at a lower frame rate, has more data in it, less compression, is my understanding. That if you shoot at 24 versus 30 on the Canons, you are getting better image quality per frame.
Is that a processor limitation?
I don't know what the limitation is.
Yeah, it used to be a processor limitation, but they changed it. Like, they made the AIPC3 or
I don't know where I mean, obviously it costs them more money to build a device that records at a higher bit rate, but I don't know where the bottleneck is. Like, what is the thing that is it? The disk obviously plays a role, like the kind of SD. You have to get class 10 SD cards. Does everyone know this thing? If you go check out one of these 5Ds and shoot some video, and you have an SD card to record on, or compact flash. Is compact flash rated in classes the same way as SD cards? Does anybody know?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I just get extreme range.
Yeah, that's the SanDisk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the 70s use the SD, which is very nice.
Mm-hmm. It's a speed rating in megabytes. It's rated for at least 10 megabytes. anyway, it's the speed of video. So that's a limitation. The speed at which we're recording the card. The speed of that image processor, whatever. But yeah, mixing and matching frame rates is generally bad. Like it's always been trouble. And you can use Twixtor, you can use a plugin, you can get around it. But the best thing, and the great thing about film too, is that because it's an even number, is it's easy to work on 1s, 2s, 3s, right? You can 12 frames drop into a 24 frame composition will look nice. It'll just go every other frame. It won't look irregular. 8 frames dropped in. It'll look good. It's not. You can't do the same thing with 30 or with 25, especially with 25, which is the European standard. In fact, for a long time before digital processing got good enough, most PAL countries, my understanding, is you would simply speed up a 24 frame master by about 1%.
LSN is just
Right. So that means that everybody until, nowadays it's digitally processed and this isn't the case anymore, but for decades home video in most of the world, PAL world, was 1% faster. So everyone was infinitesimally higher pitched.
Yeah, and another question following up, should we do automatic mode? What do you suggest?
Absolutely not. The reason this isn't snobbishness. The reason is simply that computers can make a pretty good decision about making a single image correctly focused and at correct focus and exposure. And in fact, the newer cameras they don't even necessarily dumbly decide that whatever is in the center of your shot is the thing you want to focus on. They're actually getting much smarter if you have a composition where it's not centered, of focusing on what is actually the subject of the shot. So it's really good, but that's for one frame, right? Not only does a computer shooting video have to make that decision, again and again and again. You notice how when you take a picture, you can hold down the button to let it focus, analyze the shot. Think about how long that interval is. Put down the button, beep, take a picture. Think about how much time it had to analyze the scene. Now, a more expensive camera will do that faster. 7D will do it faster than a T2i, 5D will do it faster than but still takes time. So not only does it have to make those decisions 20 times a second, but it also has to make them the same as each other. And that's where auto mode falls down in video. It not only has to make the shot look nice, it has to make every frame the same. And that's why you need manual mode, because you'll get flickering. You'll get shifts in color because of white balance. Show of hands, does everyone know what white balance is? Okay. It's color calibration. There is really almost no pure white light in the world. Everything has a color. So you want to tell the camera what white is in the shot. Usually that can be quickly done. I was hoping to get a picture of the icons. There we go. I'll paste this into the wiki. There are these handful of standard icons. Usually the three variables, you're going to have sunlight, which is bluish in color, tungsten lights, which are orange in color, and fluorescent lights, which are greenish. Those are usually your three. And sun, fluorescent, tungsten. Right? You can kind of ignore these other ones. Like, usually a camera you can quickly flip into one of those, and that's close enough. If you were really being picky, you would want to calibrate, which involves finding a piece of as pure white as you can get in the shot, bringing in sheets of typing paper to a film shoot is an easy way to do this, and calibrating on it. And then you'll notice the difference. You'll notice that without white balancing at all, like even without auto, the color will look wrong. White balancing to one of these three defaults will look correct, but maybe not as same as what your eye sees. Calibrate, if you take the time to calibrate, you'll notice that the color in the shot will get much, much closer to what your eye actually sees.
But do you do it the same way you do it for photography? You set it up in the beginning. Because there are two things that confuse me. One is the white balance, because once you go into this video mode, then I wasn't sure how to get. I know how to do it for photography, but I wasn't sure how to get it in the video mode.
Well, I've actually never shot with 5D, so you'll have to look up in the camera manual how to do it. But what's
You want to know, the way the 5D works is you have to take a picture.
No, I know, but how do you do this in the video mode?
Whenever you set in the photo mode, it becomes one of the custom. It is now the custom white balance for the video mode as well.
So you save it.
So you have to go into the queue, press Q and then go into the menu, and it should be able to use that custom white
Oh,
balance
so
that you
you
set.
have the-
So essentially, what's neat about everyone with a photography background is you can now shoot video, right? I mean, like most of these techniques are identical, right? Like if you but you have to get some familiarity with manual mode. So yeah, manual focus, manual iris, manual white balance.
Just if we're starting to shoot anyway, I mean, the white balance shows just put a white sheet of paper in front of your
No, this
subject.
is fine, yeah.
No,
it's
just for later calibration and correction, just put a white sheet of paper for like a second, take it off, continue shooting. If anything goes
Yeah,
wrong.
that's the perfect way. Like
Yeah.
you don't have to do the white balance then.
It's better.
And this is rather heavily
a gray card.
right.
A white card will like make it blow out. So if you can find a gray card, and if you want, I'll show you where you can get it. That's
No,
really
no,
cheap.
I have a great
Oh,
yeah.
perfect.
Okay. The more sophisticated we get with color correction, right, the less critical this may seem. But remember that with the 5D, 7D, with the DSLRs, we're shooting really heavily compressed video, so it's best to get the colors pretty close to what you want the first time, because any drastic changes even in high quality. Let me see if I have a example. Any drastic changes, then you will run into artifacts, and that's the big difference between between high-end cameras. You can see so you can start seeing artifacting here. Let's turn it down. Like that. Those squares are not part of the natural image. Those are compression artifacts that were hidden when the image was in normal color, but were exposed when we began tweaking the colors past what the designers of the compression expected they'd need to do to hide the artifacts from us. So yeah, more questions? Anybody?
Any suggestions on how to work with cutouts?
With what?
Cutouts and
Sure. So the best way to do that, I find, is to prepare. Unless you're working under the camera, which is anybody doing that? Is anyone like getting Dragon and setting up an actual setup and?
I was going to
Yeah.
just decide to do all
Oh yeah. Because depending on how you work, that can be a really fast and satisfying way to manipulate things. In fact, one thing that I would really like to work on at some point would be bringing back the Oxberry, which was a classic downshooting camera for cutout animation that tons and tons of effects and animation work was done on for like 70 years. Terry Gilliam's Monty Python inserts were made on it, the laser blasts in Star Wars, because it could not only photograph things, it could also project. You could photograph something, and of course you have to wait and develop the film, project it, and then re-photograph what you projected. You could photograph something, back the camera up, and photograph something else, and then do multiple exposures. This was and kitting this out with a DSLR, Pico projector, and a laptop, you could do some interesting stuff because it's sort of immediate feedback. I wouldn't discount that idea if you want to set that up and work that way. It's really pretty easy. I mean, you just get a DSLR and a tripod that can point straight down, or a dedicated copy stand, and a decent source of light, and play around.
It must be easier to move this stuff around, because I found it a pain in the ass to try to cut out pieces and figure out how they would move in Photoshop. Just do it by hand.
Yeah.
It's easier than
Yeah, I mean, don't discount that. Also, consider cutting things out by hand and scanning them in. Like already cut out. Use a color background that's easy to remove. But fundamentally, like here, is a cutout character for Photoshop. Right, so this comes in like this, and you're going to see, here are all the parts, right? We have an arm that's composed of, here, let's put a, here. No, we have an arm that's composed of an upper arm, and a lower arm, and several different hand poses. And you have, and see, is it type? Here you've got eyes with a blink frame, right? And you've got pupils that can move around. And you've got the whole head here, and a separate jaw. Yep. Based on, do I still have the original? I might not have the original painting. This, this is it. The cartoony bits are my drawing. I basically drew this on top of a 18th century painting of George Washington. I did. Well, I wanted an officer. They just had a great detailed painting with all the buttons and braid and the uniform. So this is. Yeah, so all these parts here, so we have a torso front, and this is following a scheme too. One important thing to realize is we don't spring into the world knowing okay, well, how do I break up a character into so many parts for animation, right? I learned this from Victoria Nice, who's the co-developer of the the motion capture app. Like this is the scheme that they use at ABC that they use to break down characters. They'll do this for documentaries. They'll do this for so. This is basically a recipe that I learned from her, like how many pieces to break the character down into. Things like having a small piece of the torso, and you can get as detailed as you want. Depends on how detailed and clean you want your style to be. Like things like having a small piece of torso in the back there, so that if the head moves, you can see something in the back of the head. So here are legs.
These are the types of figures that you use to connect to pin.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
these correspond number-wise.
Right. So here's a foot. Here's a foot, and I'm pretty sure I showed you these guys this when I first did it. Right. The oops, that's not it. Right. I showed everyone this. Yeah.
Is that Charlie?
Give me another. I will not bat.
It's definitely Charlie inspired.
He is Percy. He is thunder. Don't you are ashamed to give me a Janus like? He is uncouth. He is with nails up there.
Yeah, this is their. I've told you all about this, right? English as she is spoke. There's an 18th century Portuguese English phrase book that has is a classic. It's you can get it on Project Gutenberg. This thing is it's like 150 years old. English as she is spoke. Essentially what happened was a company had produced a Portuguese-French phrase book, and they wanted to do a quick cash-in, so they simply took a French-English dictionary and, without actually speaking any English, translated every French item in the book into English. It's machine translation. You read this, and there's like dozens of these little dialogues, and they all read like machine spam. Only it was generated by human computers in 1850.
Want to lead to the farrier?
Your pistols are its loads.
No, I forgot to buy gunpowder and balls. Go us more fast. Never I was seen as so much bad beast. She will not nor to bring forward, neither put back.
Strike him the bridle, hold him the reins, charters. Dig strongly, make to march.
I have pricked him enough, but I can't to make march.
Many of these, it's impossible to tell what they're talking about. But it's awesome. There are dozens of these dialogues, and we're going to do a bunch of them. That's what the Monty Python bit is referring to. I'm pretty sure. There's one Python sketch where it's a Hungarian with a bad phrase, deliberately Yeah, there's a character in my class who deliberately messes up phrase books to get travelers in trouble, and then it cuts from this to a Hungarian guy, saying these bizarre things in a tobacco shop. So those are the characters in action, and that seemed really crude. That's just one pass. That's not any hand animation. You could take that crude.
Was that animated with connect to pin?
Yeah, so that's unretouched connect to pin. You could step in there, and we will before this is all over. You can step in there and add hand animation. You could add different facial expressions. You could add clean things up. So the shoulder sort of jerks around there. So yeah, you could do a lot more with that. But those are puppets. So to look in Photoshop, you can set this all up in Photoshop and bring that in. Also, these are just flipped too. It's generally a bad idea, I find, to scale your assets in a graphics program. And you could just bring in one arm and one leg, and then negative 100%, negative 100%, flip them. I find sometimes weird stuff happens when you do that. So I generally just duplicate it in Photoshop. But here it is in Photoshop. Here are all the pieces. Here are all the.
Would it have been a much bigger pain in the ass if you animated without connecting?
Different look.
Just a
Different look. Definitely, if human motion isn't a thing, then there's not much reason to do motion capture, right? I mean, tons of excellent animation has been done without it. I mean, it is interesting. A lot of the stuff we kind of hold up as sort of canonical examples of animation. Right? If you think of Disney and Warner Brothers, and how different their styles are. Think of Snow White or Sleeping Beauty versus Looney Tunes. One of the big differences you're seeing there is that Disney used rotoscoping. And motion capture is the descendant of the type of rotoscoping. Disney used rotoscoping. Nearly every scene in a Disney feature from the Golden Age was acted out by live actors in front of a camera and then traced. Versus Looney Tunes were all freehand drawn. They were also much cheaper. Made by a far smaller group of people working for much less money. So the styles come out of the technology that was used. I'm really interested in exploring this, but there's obviously tons of ways to animate that don't involve motion capture or rotoscoping. So it's purely a style choice. Yeah.
I have a question that's pretty specific, so
Okay.
if it doesn't apply to everybody, you have to answer now. So I have, I'm working in 2D, and in one part of the animation, I want to convey that the characters are looking up.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, all I've done is move their pupils to the top of their eyeballs.
Right.
I don't know if there are any other techniques you can recommend for moving where the hair or the mouth is on the face
Mm-hmm.
to indicate the head's looking up, or if there's any rotation, I don't know, if there are any techniques you can recommend.
Sure. Is this specific, are you using motion capture puppet pins? Are you using cutouts? Is freehand drawn? What's the technique?
In this, it's all people drawn in Illustrator.
Right.
And yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're drawing, then it's easy. I mean, just draw them looking up. The question becomes how do you time that out? And I would say is it a quick motion? Are they surprised, or is it a gradual?
It's gradual.
Yeah, because
Watching someone be affected by an alien.
one way to do a quick pose cheaply, and this is going to be really crude because I don't have a Wacom tablet with me, but.
Disney books, animation,
Right.
Right.
they say exaggeration.
Right.
So it's, I guess with something like that, which you want to convey surprise in any direction, you might want to move it out of the space You know how like
Yeah.
in Looney Tunes, the eyes leave the body. That's really cartoony. I don't know if that's what you're.
Right. But
No, but I'd
well,
like to play with that.
so that kind of exaggeration is also cheap. Remember, Looney Tunes is like 5 people like working in one room and like we're with public domain classical music and then like running off to a sound booth once in a while to get like June Foray and Mel Blanc to record all the voices. Like there's a reason they had only 2 voice actors for that entire series. Yeah, so like yeah, the web is cheap. You know, they'll do, and there's a lot in there that we can take advantage of. So the pop poses, which are abrupt transitions from one pose to another, are great because you only need 2 drawings. So here's one, and
You're in Flash.
yeah, I'm glad. But this you can do the same in Photoshop. Oops. So yeah, you can do the same in fact, I should probably, I still do a lot of initial freehand drawing in Flash, but Photoshop's animation tool just keeps getting more and more powerful.
Which one?
Photoshop's animation tool. Photoshop has an animation palette. If you don't like Flash or don't already know it, and are just starting in animation, there's not really any reason to leave Photoshop's animation palette. We can look at that in a second, but let me just finish the example here. So we have pose 1, pose 2, and is anybody like using Flash? Okay, so we'll just look at the drawings. Forget what I'm doing here in the interface. It's still a great way to work with lots of keyframes, Flash, and get stuff roughed out. Even the brushes all suck. You know, get the look right, then take it to Photoshop to do what we can look at in a moment. Yeah, I mean, nothing gets finished in one program. Like, and that's also like one. People hadn't quite figured this out when I went through undergrad, like, and was exposed to Maya the first time, and all of us were trying to like finish projects entirely in Maya, which nobody does. Right? No, like you never see a film that was done entirely, that never took a trip through a compositing program, through an editing program. It's just not how things are made. So here we have 2 frames of each. So I'm going to shrink down. There's motion up, and then correct. This will work better. Oops.
So you stretch him up to the extreme and then stretch it back down.
Exactly. Well, you stretch down in preparation for the change, then you overcorrect, and then you go to the final 1, 2, 3, 4.
Those 3 things.
Prepare, extend, and then correct. And you can add a little inertia. There are like 9 or 12 principles of animation. It all boils down to inertia. Like inertia is what gives things. Oops. All right. So if you want to be extra detailed, you can add a little after effect as it. So what's great is you've just conveyed this expression. You know, here's the character, not surprised, in 2 drawings. Right? You've only made 2 drawings. I mean, if you want to make it gradual, oops. Oops. So you could also
There's like a whole thing in those studios where you just learn how to do eyes.
right. Why are we? Oops. So this is Flash's way of setting a keyframe. Once again, all I'm doing here is except this. So this is just like a keyframing position in After Effects. Once again, we're not going to spend too much time on the interface. I have a bunch of Flash tutorials on my tutorial site if anyone is actually interested in just learning this for drawing. It's very quick. The only catch is its interface is nothing like any Adobe product. If anyone wants me to give a primer in Flash, but if they think they're going to do lots of drawing animation, I'd be happy to help. But yeah, it can be daunting. We'll look, because I think it's probably more directly relevant to everybody. We'll look at the Photoshop animation palette in a second. But so there, we just added a tiny upward motion to the eyeballs before being surprised.
It's really helpful.
And it's cheap. That's the thing, right? We're still dealing with two drawings. We applied a simple effect. And what's interesting is that these are computer graphics distortions, right? We just scaled it down and up and back, but these aren't tweens, right? These were human decisions because we're actually applying we're actually making aesthetic decisions with each of these. This isn't an automated process. And you can you can keep refining this, like you can go into the ease. This is the equivalent of the ease in, oops, I'm always getting those mixed up. So then it slowly looks up. But that's basically the approach here. So, I'll put that up, thank you. Looking at it. So, the animation palette. Let's start with the simpler. So, if anyone's interested in this, you might want to follow along in Photoshop. For one thing, for more complex animations, you can just import a video layer directly. Video layers, new video layer from File. So here's a video. And you can just paint on it.
And good things.
You can just add paint, huh?
Yep. Let's see. Where's our new layer?
So you can theoretically make After Effects do the work of the interpolation,
Mm-hmm.
and then go into Photoshop to add flare.
Mm-hmm. And here you can have you can add onion skinning. Enable onion skins.
You live stream or live?
I'm advancing every frame here. Now there are two modes you can work in here. One of them, your frames create a single layer. Let's play this back here. So there's all the random bread crap I was drawing. This may end up being a little confusing looking if you can't remember what you had where. But it's a way to animate quickly. I'm going to freehand draw and just... Here, let's get rid of this layer.
Did you advance it manually?
Yeah, oh yeah. You can advance next. The right and left arrow keys will take you to next frame, previous frame, and you can also do that with this go to. You have to enable timeline shortcut keys to turn on right and left arrow keys. Stupidly. Set timeline. Frame rate. So this is great. You can combine this with video. You can clone. There's the clone stamp. A lot of interesting stuff you can do. And it all just plays back.
Does this have I've seen 3D in Photoshop?
3D in Photoshop is basically you can load up a 3D model to paint a texture on it. So you're not really working in 3D, you're painting the texture in a model in 3D.
And then you export the PNG.
You exactly export the texture. I can look into this. I've never actually done it. I can look into this and report back for next time. If people are interested in using this. Yeah, but that's what it is. It's not really a 3D modeling mode, so much as it is a 3D view where you can paint your texture while seeing what it will look like on your model. And yeah, I hear it's pretty good. It's gotten pretty good. So the other way, the older way that Photoshop has so once again, you get to this by saying new video layer from file to load a movie, and new blank video layer. Once again, think as you look at this, think of how badly named these are, right? Would you necessarily know that new video layer from file meant open a movie, import video clip? I mean, it's funny how like good technical writers, like it's one of those things you never notice until someone's not doing their job well. Like some of these things are so confusing, and we all learn what they are eventually, but it's so not obvious. So once again, new video layer from file to load a movie, new blank video layer to draw. Another way of working, which is a little more cumbersome, but maybe more helpful, if because you notice there's no real way to keep track of individual frames here. You can say convert to frames. This basically evolved out of an animated GIF editor. You can make a bunch of frames like this in Photoshop. Here, I'm going to close this and start from scratch. And those aren't a series of frames. Those are just turning layers on and off, like this frame mode. This may be a way you like to work. So here, I want to create 3 layers. Get rid of the background because it's confusing. And I'm going to say here, notice that there's no frames right now. Create video timeline. And I'm going to turn it from that timeline mode to frame mode. Notice how I have 3 layers and 1 frame here. And then I'm going to create some more frames. All these aren't frames like the mode we were just working with. These are just remembering which layers you turned on and off. See? So if I have these all on, and let's say I'll start here and I'll draw this, and then I'll draw this, and then I'll draw this. 3, 2, 1. Where's the timeline frame rate? Yeah, they move this around in every version. Here you can put a delay between each one, and confusingly, the reason that it comes this way here, delay 0.1 seconds, what's that? It's because this began as an animated GIF editor. If you remember, if anyone has ever made animated GIFs, you would specify a delay for each frame. That's where this comes out of. If it helps, 1 divided by 24 is 0.04. 1 divided by 12 is close to 0.1. So this is about 12 frames per second. The reason that precision doesn't matter here is that this is all going to be exported to After Effects anyway, right? All these frames are going to be, it may not even remember which ones were turned on where. This is really just to help you if you're working with one drawn frame per layer. So really, if you think of this mode as really just a visual aid that helps you sequence your animation if you're drawing 1 frame per layer. And people do this. I forget if I showed an excerpt of Howie Shia's Flutter. I think it's a wonderful film, and that was done entirely using that method. I think there's some After Effects in there, mostly using that method.
So what's the other one called?
Timeline. I don't know. How do they call them? Convert to frame animation. And then convert to video timeline. So yeah, frame and timeline modes.
So now each one of those are a video timeline layer.
Right. And they have keyframes. That's what's so nuts about this timeline mode. Is if you look at this, there are opacity keyframes set on these layers behind the scenes.
After Effects version 2.
Yeah, essentially, this is a crude little After Effects timeline. You can even tween position. Check it out. I'm going to get rid of the opacity keyframes.
And then that gets inputted into After Effects as a PSD.
I think these come as multiple layers. Let's try this, actually. I've only used this for creating for testing flat art.
You can export a movie as well.
Render video, right? So you can export a movie. You can export a movie. Photoshop image sequence. Remember, avoid compressed stuff while you're working, right? So you want Photoshop. You want to stay on this side of things. Photoshop, PSD. JPEG 2000, by the way, is the compression that gets used in movie theaters for the DCP, which is the file format for the movies you watch in the movie theater. Everyone's aware of that, right? Pretty much now at this point, any movie theater you go into through a great part of the world, certainly anywhere in the States, you will be watching a 2K DCP movie file, like a QuickTime, in JPEG 2000 format. Sorry number, blah, 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 document rate, frame rate. 12, all frames, render. I am very curious to see what will happen here. So it's render. And there it goes. So you would, right. So you may not want this because that motion you're keyframing in Photoshop, it's coming in as individual frames. Normally, you probably want to create individual assets and then animate them in After Effects. But it's there in Photoshop if you want to use it. So here, I'm going to import that sequence. Remember that if you have it set to sequence, you get all the images in here. And here we go. There's the animation. So you can do a lot in that. I would recommend, if you're working in cutouts, though, using this mode to compose alternatives. Like, if you want, or make a, for example. Like these different hand positions. Oops, hold on. Right, see how we have, I think I showed this before. These different alternatives for the hands. Which I drew, by the way. I don't think any of these were original to the George Washington reference photo. Also, I noticed that I used 3 fingers instead of 4. It's just an old cartoon convention, just because hands are hard to draw, and if you have 1 fewer finger, it's easier. I mean, that's hence the joke in The Simpsons where Lisa holds up the magazine saying, "In the future, if all humans will have 5 fingers." But yeah. So, more questions? Yeah.
Is there any possibility to the razor tool if you put footage into After Effects? So
Yes.
You can basically cut
It is edit split layer.
it.
Command Shift D. That may be if you learn any shortcut in After Effects, Command Shift D, split. Yeah, I don't know why there's no razor tool.
And then it can be
Yeah, well,
then
you can
delete, right?
you can well, you can pull the edges or you can delete.
Yeah, I don't conceptually understand what a shader is when you're like manipulating it in MeshLab.
Mhm.
So we were successful in doing the Connect scan, and we have a nice, interesting shape. And in MeshLab, you can render, or you can put on a shader.
Right.
But I could not export that information in any format.
Right.
I know that I can use in After Effects.
Yeah, so a shader is basically a command for your graphics card to apply some effect to an image. Or your renderer in Maya. Whatever whatever MeshLab is working with is probably not likely to be the same as what what Maya has or what your other programs have. Where is this here? One of the easiest ways to demonstrate this, like I just figured out, has anyone tried applying OpenGL shaders to things in processing? Yeah.
It has a lot of new examples in the new version. I think form. The guy who, the really important guy from the demo scene, Inigo Pelez, Pixar, so he made a shader, and it's now featured in the processing examples.
Nice. I find processing 2 is still really buggy. Like I know in the Patrick's graphics class, they're using 1.5, right? Folks there confirm because it's buggy. So this is something I did in processing, and the reason it doesn't look like processing is that there's an OpenGL shader running over it. So essentially, I've taken a couple of very simple examples and applied an effect to them. This bloom effect, which is being done by the graphics card, which is why it's so fast.
This is the example from processing itself.
Cool.
And it's really running below any kind of CPU.
Right. So yeah, a shader is essentially a set of commands that get sent to a 3D renderer. In this case, usually your graphics cards. Here, okay, let's get a computer program that runs the graphics processing unit and is used to do shading. It's used though very generically now. Like it's not just image processing, but basically any kind of GPU processing. You can generate geometry with a shader.
So now that you have this processing stack, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you do to try to get that looking out?
In After Effects, I would look at what it was doing, like effects, stylize, glow.
You would try to mimic it using.
Right, like there is a way to load OpenGL shaders in After Effects. It's called Pixel Bender. Look into Pixel Bender. However, I have been warned that it's unsatisfying to dive into. There are some changes you need to make to. Shaders are written in a language called GLSL.
It's also consistent between machines, which is the worst.
Yeah.
If you send one to the studio, in After Effects, you can get away with that. You can send a package to the studio and it's the same rendering engine everywhere. So
Right.
You're involving the hardware and it's different.
Well, but you could also write one for V-Ray or Mental Ray or
Yeah,
it's
so when you use software renderers that are the same everywhere, then yes,
Right.
you need hardware renderers.
yeah. Does everyone get what so a shader is a set of commands for anything that does graphics processing. It could be your graphics card, your GPU, your hardware, which gives you fast real-time performance, or it could be some software like the renderers, which are actually when you render in we'll say in After Effects, when you choose between your classic 3D or the classic 3D or the new crashy ray trace 3D renderer. It's once they get the bugs out, that's cool though, because then if you switch to ray trace 3D mode, you can have curved layers. You don't have to have flat parts; you can curve them. But it does crash a lot. The that's a CS6 thing. But Maya chooses from multiple renderers. You have multiple renderers to choose from. And what Omer's saying is that if you're using hardware, it will look slightly different depending on what your graphics hardware is. Right? So you have one graphics card on one computer, one graphics card on another computer. It will look slightly different, which can be a problem if you're trying to coordinate dozens or hundreds of people in a studio. If it's software, then it should be the same everywhere.
So I can typically do a video of the asset that I want to have the shader. Find some program that can apply that shader to that piece, that asset, and then export it or render it then as an video.
Well, I would say yes, but I would say that it would only be worthwhile if it was a really neat effect that you couldn't get any other way. Like for this, you can really just apply, blur and glow filters in After Effects. You really don't even need the glow. You can just Gaussian blur plus levels plus duplicating layer over itself. But for something unusual, maybe it'd be worth it. So that there's this pixel bender. Is there a? I'm thinking I had one that I had plugged together as a demo, but I don't think it made it to this new version of After Effects.
I was able to get it close. I was just curious if there was a way to take that shader information.
Yes, so yes, there is. So look up Pixel Bender, but it isn't easy. And I would say for non-real time stuff, not a lot of reason to do it. In other things like jitter ships with tons of shaders and processing. So where is that that actual?
I guess what you could do is you could put it in processing as well, and then export the frames.
There we go. So these GLSL shaders, these are the come on. These are what's actually doing that work in processing. Oh, it's being stupid. I think I have this linked elsewhere. It's not buffering. Other questions? Here, here's Pixel Bender. Yeah.
I used to know this, but wasn't there a way to review, like a preview effects before you apply it?
Yeah, RAM preview in After Effects.
No, there was something that was like a separate panel of Windows that showed preview of.
That's in motion. No, he's talking about Brainstorm.
Is that?
Oh yeah?
I don't know what it is.
You know, where you pick an effect parameter, and it shows you different versions of when you affected it.
I never used that. Is that any good?
Yeah, it is good.
Is that something?
It is
and something like that. It also has like
Never using these all there.
like many different
That was the. Where's the icon for that now?
small windows of like a thumbnail of what they're
For like,
Yeah.
Bridge has that too.
Oh yeah, I think somewhere in the bridge. Can you show me how to do that?
I don't see. Yeah, I don't see Brainstorm. Like I.
took that out.
Yeah, there's, I saw things on
Oh yeah.
Okay, so it's right next to the motion blur.
yeah.
You gotta pick the parameter that you want, and then right next to the motion blur.
Here's
Mobile motion.
Oh, they changed the icon.
what?
Oh, that's cute. Okay, so you pick a parameter that you want. All right, so let's try this. Effect. light burst. Pick the parameter and brainstorm. Multiple parameters.
So it previews a bunch of different settings and then
He also showed, how to use
Bridge?
the bridge.
I don't know what the value of Bridge is if you're just working by yourself. Bridge is an app for like an Adobe app.
Part of bridge that shows you like all arrays of effects and what are all.
Really?
No, it shows the presets.
Yeah.
Like if you want to see the animation of the letter animations, it shows every one of them in the preview.
Right.
You're right, it does do the effects as well.
Right. I forgot how to do that.
That's interesting. So you get what I'm saying? Bridge is a way of organizing stuff that I've never touched. There's a handful of tools in the Creator Suite that are mostly useful for larger collaborations, sharing files. One that's perhaps worth just mentioning is the dynamic link, which isn't really something you need to use so much as if you can load After Effects products directly into Premiere and render them there. Then edit and then double click on them and go into them. And it actually uses After Effects as rendering engine to do it. Anyway, so that's the brainstorm option. See how it's randomizing the values? You can pick one. But Bridge, so you're telling me, so I would go into After Effects and look at the plugins and it would give me a demonstration of each one?
Yeah, it actually shows you.
Okay.
You know what you can do?
What?
If you go to, but that's only the transition. If you go to the effects panel and you go to the drop down menu, there is a browse presets, and that opens up Bridge, and then those are all your presets, not effects.
Effects and preset. Preset to this? Browse presets. Okay.
And then the folders. And then when you go into each one, it shows you a little preview of each of them.
No, it does. I mean, the preview window is just showing me a... No?
Yeah, so if you look, it shows you like a little
How-
preview of.
Oh, crazy. Well, how did you get that? I've just got these icons.
Yeah, that's weird. The view within the segment, I don't know why it's not previewing. But it's an actual QuickTime movie that they have in your Adobe.
That's great.
Support that shows you what the
Right. Yeah.
presets gonna look like. But I thought there was one with effects, but I can't remember how to get it.
Well, maybe... What folder are you in?
I am in presets. Oh,
Maybe
so
it's
effects.
only genuine Adobe plugins that have that. Like maybe third-party plugins don't have that.
That would be the case. So I'm in Bridge.
Oh, where is that?
This is Bridge. This is installed with Creative Suite.
Right. So.
Okay. Well, that's cool.
Yeah, that's where so you're in presets and
Yeah, the way to get to it then, if you just say from effects and presets, browse. Yeah, it's a much easier way of getting to it. That's what Greg was saying. In your effects and presets panel, say browse presets, and it'll take you to that. More questions? Anybody? Yeah?
Can we talk about proxies and proxies?
Okay. So proxies are low-res versions of a high-res comp that you plan to replace later. So if I create this, and once again with shapes you probably want to move, I hit Y for the anchor point tool. You can also get to that here. You'll find this you'll run into this a lot in 3D graphics programs as well. It'll insist on putting the anchor point somewhere non-intuitive, and you'll have to manually move it to the center of your shape, and then when you rotate it or scale it, it will kind of make intuitive sense. It'll come from the center. It's the same thing as, I mean, it's just a matter of taste. I always change in processing. I'll always change ellipses, centers to center mode because it just seems to make more sense to go from the center to me. So here's a comp. And go to animation. And let's render this as a proxy. So you can do this two ways. One is you can render this in the usual way and then right-click on anything and say Set Proxy and choose a file. Or you can right-click to Create Proxy Movie. And it will set this to draft settings by default. You can customize it. Sorry. And then it automatically sets it. This little white square here means it's been a proxy. So, and you get this red proxy enabled. And then if I use this in a new comp, remember that in general, duplicating things over itself, these are it's a nice way to get some interesting effects. I use these in a new comp. Notice that when I go back into something and change it, it does not update. Right? That's because the proxy is enabled. It's reading from a rendered file. If I get rid of proxy, look what happens. None. So in general, this can be more trouble than it's worth. Because you have to remember where your proxy is, remember that you have a proxy. Sometimes, although this is less a problem now than in the past, if the proxies were different resolutions, it can throw things off when you switch them out. There's pretty much the one big application is if you're working, well, two applications. One is just if you have a really, really complex nested series of animations. And let's say I have a really complex project one, and then I duplicate it 100 times. And if I don't use a proxy, it'll have to re-render that over and over and over. Whereas if I use a proxy, it renders it once, and then so if you have complex nested animations, that can really speed things up. The other is if you are working with really high quality video footage, and you want to, like if you have like a shot with a red camera, and you want to create a more compressed preview to watch while you work, and you can swap that out with your original at the end. So neither of those you are probably likely to encounter right now, but it's there if you need to use it. In general, like if you're working with sprites, especially if you have a single element that's an animation that you duplicate it a bunch of times, you might want to use this. Another thing to be aware of when you render your whole project, by default, it will use no proxies. So here's best settings, use no proxies. This can be really annoying, this two-part. Remember that here is all your render settings, and then here are all of your codec format decisions.
It's workflow decision. After Effects computes an image and then that's it on.
Compress it. So yeah, you might want to use, if you're rendering with proxies, you might want to say, use all proxies. In general, for most things, it's a complication you don't need. Let's take a short break. But I want to stick around. This is our third from last class, or second from last, right? And there's one more after this, and then we are looking at our final project. So take a short break, but I definitely want to hear about all the trouble you're having. Yeah. Does no one want to leave? Okay. So yeah, basically just keep questions coming. If anyone wants to show some stuff they've been working on, come out for the free. I'll make you all do it next time. We'll go around as usual. But I want to spend today on troubleshooting, especially. Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yes.
I managed to get some of my work done in Grasshopper because it was the easiest to.
Yeah.
You know Grasshopper free?
I never used it, but I know.
Well, it's amazing because you can take data and.
Tell everybody about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll show you.
Sure. Yeah. Hello.
Anyway, so I managed to get it working in Grasshopper, and the thing is that animating in Rhino is well unusual.
Yeah.
So
We're gonna bring stuff from Grasshopper into Maya.
yeah, and there's no easy way to do that apart from OBJ sequences, which is a mess, I've heard. So have you ever done that?
Yes. There is in Maya. I wrote a little stupid Python thing which may be useful to load all. I mean, it's very crude because it just loads up all of your images or all your objects and then switches them on and off per frame.
Yeah, but does it preserve textures and so on?
Well, that depends on your whether your object export can handle that. It should. It should. But so I would try it with
I need to
one.
create tags for everything in that sense. They need to be consistent. Actually, they will be consistent. So yeah.
Object sequence. Objects. And then here's my. Yeah. So here's the code. So do this.
Currently doing this in Houdini, so it's not like that straightforward.
Well, Houdini has a reputation for being really difficult. Here, let me stop this.